Good evening, poets, translators, and poetry lovers. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's book talk on In the Light of Shiva, Selected Poems of H.S. Shivaprakash, published by Red River with the support of the Raza Foundation. A very warm welcome to our poet, Professor H.S. Shivaprakash. Welcome also to Carlos Aguasaco, poet and professor of Latin American Cultural Studies at the City University of New York, and Professor Shweta Garg, poet, writer, and professor at Johns Hopkins University, USA. And a special welcome to Rati Saxena, poet, translator, and the founder and director of Kritya-Poetry, who has brought us together this evening. A warm welcome to everyone joining us from different parts of India and elsewhere. Thank you for being with us. Friends, In the Light of Shiva brings together a substantial selection from nearly 5 decades of H.S. Shivaprakash's poetry. Published by Red River with the support of Raza Foundation, the volume brings together poems from across his career and makes available to English readers a body of work that has been an important part of Kannada as well as Indian poetry for nearly half a century. This evening, we have conceived the book talk as a conversation around the poems from this volume. We have invited 3 poets to respond to the book in their own ways, followed by readings and a conversation with Professor Shivaprakash himself. I would like to begin by inviting Rati Saxena to say a few words of welcome. Rati ji. Your mic is off, I think.
Namaskar. Because this whole talk is in English, I want to speak in Hindi for my Hindi audience so that they can understand what we are going to do it. One thing is that when I read this book, which I got recently, In the Light of Shiva, I know Shivaprakash for a long time. He participated in Kritya many times. But frankly speaking, I didn't read him well. But when I read these translations are good as well as the poetry is also fantastic. I feel that, sorry, I have to speak in Hindi. मुझे ऐसा लगा कि मुझे हिंदी के पाठकों को या उत्तर भारत के पाठकों को शिव प्रकाश, क्योंकि जो अभी कन्नड़ के लेजेंड कवि हैं समकालीन, उनके बारे में अच्छी तरह से परिचय होना चाहिए. नाम से तो सब परिचित होंगे ही, लेकिन अच्छी तरह से परिचय होना चाहिए, क्योंकि ये इस जनरेशन के कवि हैं जो जनरेशन हमको सहेज कर रखनी चाहिए. और दूसरा, ये वो कवि हैं जो अपनी जमीन से जुड़े रहे हैं, चाहे वो दुनिया में घूमते रहे हों, लेकिन वो अपनी जमीन से जुड़े रहे हैं. उनके कविता में या उनके लेखन में, उनके नाटकों में भी लोक और वैश्विकता एक साथ है. और सबसे बड़ी बात शिवप्रकाश जी की ये है कि वो भक्ति को जो एक तरह से समकाल में लेकर आए हैं, वो एक अद्भुत है. क्योंकि हिंदी में इस तरह का काम नहीं हुआ. हिंदी में ऐसा हो गया है कि भक्ति युग को भूल जाना, सूरदास के बाद में ये बहुत जरूरी हो गया. इसके बाद में आप उसके बारे में ज्यादा बात नहीं कर सकते, उसका रिक्रिएशन नहीं कर सकते. जबकि शिवप्रकाश ने उन भक्ति के जो तत्व हैं उनका रिक्रिएशन किया है. मैं शिवप्रकाश के बारे में ज्यादा बात कर रही हूँ इसलिए क्योंकि मैं पहले थोड़ा सा हिंदी के ऑडियंस को एक उदाहरण दे सकना चाहती हूँ. क्यों हम इस किताब को चुन रहे हैं, इसलिए नहीं केवल कविता के लिए बल्कि या अनुवाद के लिए, बल्कि इसलिए भी कि इस तरह की कविता को सहेज के रखना चाहिए जो अभी तक समकाल में है हमारे, और उसको समझना चाहिए कि किस तरह से अपनी जमीन से जुड़े होते हुए भी वैश्विक बन सकते हैं. ये इनकी कविता की विशेषता है. मैं लकी थी कि मैंने अयप्पा पणिकर को बहुत अनुवाद किया, बालामणि अम्मा का भी बहुत अनुवाद किया, और मैंने ये देखा कि अयप्पा पणिकर में जिस तरह के कुछ तत्व थे जो मुझे बहुत ज्यादा अचंभित करते थे, वैसे तत्व शिव प्रकाश की कविता में भी है। वो अलग तरीके से हैं, यहाँ अलग तरीके से हैं। पिछली बार जब मैंने उनका नाटक देखा था, प्ले देखा था, तब मैंने ये देखा था कि ये वही यहाँ पर नाटक जो नाटकीयता है वो एक तरह से बिल्कुल प्लेन नहीं है, बिल्कुल नहीं है, बल्कि वो भी फोक को लेकर, इतिहास को लेकर, गल्प को लेकर वर्तमान में लेकर आते हैं। और करीब करीब कावलम नारायण पणिकर के नाटकों में भी यही था कि वो संस्कृत नाटकों को, भास वगैरह के जो संस्कृत नाटक, हमारी जो कृत्या जो आरंभ हुई 2005 में, तो संस्कृत कावल नारायण पणिकर का संस्कृत नाटक भास पे आधार का जो चूड़ामणि नाटक से ही हमारा ये आरंभ हुआ था। तो वो भी संस्कृत नाटकों को वर्तमान समकाल में लेकर आते थे। तो यहाँ पर मैंने जब नाटक देखा तो मुझे लगा कि ये जमीन को नहीं छोड़ना और वैश्विकता को संभालना, जिसके लिए बालामणि अम्मा ने ये कहा था कि मैं जमीन पे पांव रखकर आसमान को छूना चाहती हूँ। बालामणि अम्मा कमला दास की माँ थी। कमला दास को हम सब बहुत ज्यादा जानते हैं, बालामणि अम्मा को हम बहुत कम जानते हैं, लेकिन कविता की दृष्टि से बालामणि अम्मा मेरी दृष्टि से भारत की सर्वश्रेष्ठ कवित्रियों में एक थी। तो ये बहुत जरूरी था कि हम इनके शिव प्रकाश की कविता के माध्यम से हम ये देखें कि समकाल की कविता में भी क्या क्या तत्व हैं और होने चाहिए। नहीं तो जैसा क्या होता है, जैसे कोरिया में सभी का चेहरा एक सा हो गया है प्लास्टर सर्जरी करके, वैसे इंडिया में अभी सारी कविता के प्लास्टर सर्जरी हो गई है। आप चाहे तमिल की कविता पढ़िए, चाहे मलयालम की कविता पढ़िए, चाहे आप हिंदी की कविता सुनिए, और चाहे आप उर्दू की पढ़िए, सारी एक सी लगती है, सबके चेहरे वेरे एक से ही हैं, बिल्कुल कोरियन जैसे। तो वो नहीं होना चाहिए। अपनी भौगोलिकता, अपनी लोक संस्कृति को रखना चाहिए। इतना ही बोल रही हूँ, मैं ज्यादा नहीं बोल रही हूँ। तो शिव प्रकाश जी मित्र हैं और आपका स्वागत है। आप थोड़ा सा बीच में आइए, आप तो आपका दर्शन हो सके लोगों को। शुक्रिया। एंड आई एम रियली ग्रेटफुल टू गेस्ट कार्लोस एंड श्वेता, both of you. I think Shweta could understand little bit and anything. Lekin Carlos can't understand what I have written. I have what I said. But you know about Shivaprakash. I was just explaining to the Hindi audience that because India is also a very big country and many languages. So sometimes we don't communicate each other. We know people. We know that this is the best poet, but we do not know how and why. So I was explaining to my audience. And welcome to all of you. And Kamalakar, I welcome to Kamalakar because Kamalakar nahi kahenge, because he has edited this book. He is the editor of it. And he is very hardworking. He is a very good translator, very good poet, very good person, human being. So Kamalakar, I welcome you on this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rati ji. I think maybe before we continue, would you like to read the translations now, or would you come back to do it?
Well, I think you have to introduce Carlos.
Okay, I'll bring
whether he's talking or he's talking,
yes,
or
yes.
he's poetry.
Yes, he will. Yeah. So
I have translated 3 poems. I can read in Hindi.
Yeah. So first we'll have Carlos talking about reading, some poems and responding to the book, and maybe also interacting with Shivaprakash, and then we'll have some translations. So, but before I go any further, I should mention one fact about my position in this discussion. As Rati ji has already mentioned, I am the editor of this volume, and I have also translated some of the poems in it alongside Manu Devadevan and Professor Shivaprakash himself. So I cannot claim the position of a completely detached moderator discussing a book with which I have had no involvement. I mentioned this not as an apology, but as a matter of transparency. I have lived with these poems for a long time. My role here is not to explain the book, but perhaps to ask some questions and facilitate through our our interlocutors, a conversation around these poems by opening up poetry from different perspectives. First of all, In the Light of Shiva is not merely a selection that represents a poet's career chronologically. It brings together a poetic imagination that has continually crossed boundaries between the contemporary and the historical, the intimate and the political, mythology and everyday life, the local and the world beyond it. Shivaprakash's poetry explores and interrogates many poetic and cultural traditions from diverse places and diverse times. Myth, history, and older poetic forms become ways of thinking about the contemporary life and contemporary world. Its landscapes can be ancient or modern, Indian or European, remembered or imagined. The poems travel across civilizations, languages, and histories, but they repeatedly turn to questions of human vulnerability, power, violence, love, memory, and the possibility of compassion. The poet has described himself in one of the poems in this volume as a stubborn pilgrim whose journeys repeatedly fail to reach their destination. That image seems particularly appropriate to the poetry as a whole. The journey matters as much as, or perhaps more than, arriving at a destination. So it is in this spirit that we would approach the book today, and I would like to now bring in our interlocutors. I'll begin with Carlos Aguasaco as a poet and scholar whose own work moves across languages and literary cultures. He's the professor of Latin American Cultural Studies at the City University of New York, and his poetry has itself traveled between Spanish and English. I remember Carlos, especially from the Sangam poetry meet at Bellary a couple of years ago. I had the opportunity to listen to him and read his poetry at the time. Carlos, you are encountering Shivaprakash's poetry from a particularly interesting position. As a poet working across cultures, as a reader of poetry in translation, and as someone whose own poetry has been shaped by the experience of the city and of cultural crossings. I would like to invite you to respond to the book in whatever way seems most natural to you. You may also read some poems that you found particularly compelling, or maybe even ask questions to Professor Shivaprakash, for all of us to get to know his perspectives also better. So over to you, Carlos.
Thank you so much for this kind invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to share this space and to honor the life and the work of my dear Shivaprakash. This is obviously a humbling exercise. Reading his work, it is my tradition when I read poetry collections that gather work across different stages in the poet's life to read it backwards. So I begin with the last page, trying to deconstruct the poetic language of the author. And I did it a couple of times with this book. First, just looking for my friend, Shivaprakash is a friend of mine. I call him brother when I see him. I have traveled hundreds of miles just to hug him for a moment, just to give him a hug, because Shivaprakash is not only a distinguished scholar, is not only a distinguished poet, but he is also an exceptional human being. So his embrace is like a blessing. His presence brings peace, happiness, and harmony around him. So in several occasions, I have had the opportunity to spend time with him. And for me, this is an honor. But a couple of clarifications before I move forward. I am distinguished and honored for this invitation. However, the space should have belonged to Rey Berroa. Rey Berroa, a distinguished poet that wrote one of the introductions to the work, is obviously closer to Shiva's level. You know, if there are levels in poetry, Shiva is right there, and I am right here, and I am sure that Rey Berroa is closer to him. So I want to endorse his reading. I believe really Rey Berroa's reading of the book and how he's trying to connect it, trying to connect the millennia of poetry in India with it's already 800 years old, but is brand new in the Andalusian and the Spanish poetry. Converging them into the voice of Shiva was an inspiring reading towards the end of my readings, and it was appealing because when I reached that point in the book, remember that I am reading backwards. I had to reread at the time to see if I could agree or not with Ray. A couple of things I have to say. It is only natural for a poet of the universal breadth of Shivaprakash to be read from different traditions and connections. You know, this is proof that humanity across the globe might reach the same crossroads, and regardless of whether we can demonstrate the influence of Indian literature or poetry into Andalusian poetry, regardless of that point, the truth is that humanity is connected through poetry. That is something that we cannot deny. So this goes beyond philology. This is more about the fact that we find a poet of universal reach, like Shivaprakash, being a poet that enters in conversation with different historical traditions, and as you said before, obviously his literary references could be connected with many places. Let me give you an example. Shiva, you don't know, but I found that the pre-Hispanic Quechua poetry that I teach in my class on poetic forms, Quechua poetry has similarities to some of your verses. So when I was reading Rey Berroa, I was thinking, oh my God! I mean, Rey brought it to the Andalusian tradition. However, what I am reading from my end is that Shiva has a connection, his poetic voice has a connection with Quechua-speaking poetry. I am not a speaker of Quechua, but I study the Quechua tradition, and I present it as one of the poetic forms in my classes. So at that time, Shiva, I said, wait a second. Did Shiva write this when he visited Ecuador a couple of years ago? And then I realized that no, that these poems had been written way before. Thus, an explanation come to my mind. That is why Shiva is so respected in Latin America. You're not asking me, but let me share with you that I have people calling me from Ecuador, telling me about the wonderful experience they had when Shiva visited Guayaquil, and how the encounter with Shiva was inspiring for a new generation of young poets that saw themselves in this inspiring figure. A towering figure like Shivaprakash was visiting Ecuador. And Shiva doesn't need these things. The poet, he's beyond, as we said in Latin America, he's beyond good and evil. He's beyond all these things. However, the young people in Ecuador, in Guayaquil, have taken the time to express gratitude for being part of the process that brought Shiva eventually to a room, a conference a poetry festival in Guayaquil where he inspired people. And it only makes sense because in the same fashion that Rey Berroa connected his work with the Andalusian poetry, these young people connected Shiva's work, Shiva's teachings with their own tradition. So at the very end, I believe, again, going beyond the philological discussion, that yes, poetry is a form of knowledge. That poetry helps people understand what makes human human, and humanity all across the world is bound to identify with great universal poetry. Okay, so let me move to my next step. This is my plan. First I wanted to recognize through my mentioning of Rey Berroa's introduction and these anecdotes, I wanted to recognize the universal reach of Shiva's work. Okay, then I want to read a poem. Okay, I want to make a couple of comments about the book, and then I like to ask Shiva a couple of questions, if that's okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the poem that I've been reading to my family, Shiva, and at home is A Lion's Reflection. It's on page 281 of the collection, and it says, A Lion's Reflection. A lion looked into a mirror and said, "See, the mirror is like me." A rabbit looked into a mirror and said, "See, the mirror is like me." A cat looked into a mirror and said, "See, the mirror is like me." A serious clamor claiming the mirror to be like them arose among the four. The four together looked into the mirror. The mirror was not like any of them. The mirror was like every one of them. They all got angry. A war ensued among them, and on the mirror, the cat ate the mouse. The lion ate the rabbit. Then the lion got after the cat and ate it up. The final war was between the lion and the mirror. The lion outside the mirror was enraged by the lion inside the mirror. Then acted like it. That acted like it. Spoke as it did. Roared as it roared. The lion broke the mirror into pieces. In the pieces, the lion found its own pieces, and in anger fell upon them and roared and rolled. And the lion too met its end. The reason I chose this poem, Shiva, brother, is because in a way, when we read you, when we all read you, when Rey Berroa reads you, when people in Ecuador reads you, when people in New York reads you, they all say his poetry is like mine, right?
Yes.
We all connect. You know, that was the point in the first part of my presentation, is that we all connect with this universal poetry. However, the poem is also a cautionary tale, right? Of how, and I am really sad to say this, you know, because the same technology that is letting me participate in this conversation from New York City with you across the globe is the same, is part of the same economical system, right? The same quote unquote civilizing, a globalizing trend that is putting at risk diversity, richness, right? There was enough room in the mirror for the cat, for the lion, for the mouse, for the rabbit, right? The need to claim the mirror for themselves is what brings the destruction to this beautiful story about us finding reflection in each other. And that's why the poem is so powerful, Shiva, right? and it's powerful because it shows, you can go back and talk about mimesis and how poetry is a reflection of the universe. And I am really sad to say that in these times, what we need is to find another end for your poem. A poem where all the animals look into the mirror and realize that there is first room for everyone, that we are like each other, and we can also keep our own identity. However, the responsibility, the big responsibility comes at this time in the lion. Power brings great responsibility. Authority brings great responsibility. And the final destroyer is the most powerful one in your poem. But I don't want to bring this to a sad end, brother. I want to say that your poem shows how poetry, right, it reflects the history of society at large, but it forces us to also understand reality. And in his introduction, in one of the introductions in the book, someone talked about you being a material mysticism, which is amazing in this context, right? The wisdom of the mirror, the wisdom of the physical existence of these beings, and the need to find another solution is what this poetry collection brings to my mind all the time. Now, I wanted to share that part, and let's put it to the side for a moment and bring another topic, Shiva. Okay? You can do a complete transversal reading of the collection with one topic, the city. The city of cities. The poet in the city. If you look for the word city, it's mentioned hundreds of times. There is the city on top of the city, and then the other city. And as someone who has seen you in several cities, brother, because I've seen Shiva in Morocco, we've been in Romania, we've been in New York, in other places together. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Master, how many countries have you visited?
Not many, maybe about 25, 26, 27, around that number.
27.
Yeah.
27. All the continents? Is there a continent that you're missing?
Talking about the countries all over the world I visited. In India, of course, I visited hundreds of cities, towns, and villages.
Mm-hmm.
But I have, since my childhood, for reasons which lie far below my conscious understanding, I felt a fascination for Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never able to travel to Latin America till I was 60 plus, 65 plus.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to wait for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Like a dedicated lover waits for his beloved. I had to wait that long because traveling to Latin America is very expensive for us Indians. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't always depend on government funding for my travels. I used to spend my money on travel to my favorite places. So I'm excited and thrilled by the response I received in Latin American countries. This is like Costa Rica, and when I've been a couple of times. In fact, a volume of my poems has been published.
You have a book there. You have a book published in one of your books was released in Costa Rica, right?
And also El Salvador. And I've been to Ecuador, I've been to Mexico. So quite a few There's quite a few for an Indian to go to. Mexico, I visited 2 times. And of course, I visited a lot of European cities and quite a few cities in the US and Canada. I've never been to Australia and New Zealand. I've not only visited city like New York, where Manhattan, which is very close to York University, is the acme of urban civilization. I've also been to reserve areas in Costa Rica. There's a place called Telemuca. And it's hard to believe that these two places coexist on the same continent, on the same planet. So it's the diversity of the world. And also, this is what makes me distrust this whole idea of linear history and linear geography. I think Octavio Paz, in one of his works, called us One Country Many Times. That's the title of one of his books, India. But I would say one world and many times. They coexist. And in this sense, I believe that poetry is an attempt to undermine the linearity of time and space, linearity of Judeo-Christian historicism, and its offshoots like liberalism and socialism. And this is what I'm trying to explore. And I am deeply involved, I'm steeped in our mystical traditions. Rati talked about devotion. It's not just devotion, mystical traditions all over the world. They unite us all. For example, when I was in Spain, I was asked to lecture about the poetry of Saint Francis of Assisi, a medieval Indian woman bhakti poet, Hulkuntemath. I discovered striking similarities and striking differences, as if they were talking to each other across time and place, agreeing sometimes and only to disagree. So this unity and diversity, this play of unity and diversity, multiplicity and unity, this is what makes the world interesting. And poetry is not just the reflection, but the celebration and dramatization, and sometimes the exaggeration of it. Because what we now have, the new world order, has surpassed the barbarities of classical capitalism, both states, both fascist and communist. We now have the most soulless and heartless corporate capitalism, which brings the countries of the world together by killing all the souls, by reducing everything to commodity fetishism.
Master, let me stop you for a second, Shiva, and make a couple of comments if that's okay.
Please.
One thing is, I do agree, and I have proposed in several places that we are living in a post-human capitalist system
Yeah,
that is trying to eliminate what makes human human. You know,
yeah,
and what is the last stance, the last place for society, for humanity, is art, obviously, and or in my case, poetry, that in many cases, as you said, goes to mysticism. But we are living in a post-human capitalism. The next frontier is the contradiction is between capitalism and humanity. Before it was material reality, or now is humanity.
yes.
Um, that's clear. But I like to ask you, and I want to share this with everyone in this meeting and with all people watching and listening. Listen, I have a depth of gratitude with you, Shiva, personally, as a writer, as a human being, because I remember when I met you, and you were a towering figure. It was in a place in Morocco, and it took me a while to get closer to you, because you know, there's the big poet from India, Shivaprakash. He's a star, blah blah blah. And then I was coming from, you know, I wanted to be a poet all my life. So I was imagining that being next to you was going to be close to someone full of gravitas and seriousness, which is true. However, Shiva, and this is one of the things that I always talk about when I talk about you to with other people. Although you are a great poet, an older person, okay, you are also most of the time the youngest poet in the room. You are the most playful one. You are the most open-minded. That's amazing. So the sharing with you those trips, you know, when we travel in Morocco, when we were in Romania and other places, one of the things that I believe inspires young people with your poetry is that you made me feel, at least, and I think you have done the same with other people. You made me feel authorized to be playful and serious at the same time, to be to look for my spirituality, and also to make critiques of material reality. I don't. So what is the secret, Shiva, to be such a young child and also a wise soul in the same body, brother? What is the secret? And I'm telling you that
Yes,
this is what people say all around the world about you. You know.
see, I believe I'm also a playwright, and in our mystical philosophies, play is the metaphor for the world. So, unless there's playfulness, it's not poetry. Poetry is for enjoyment. In Sanskrit, it's called rasa, savoring. We don't talk about reading poetry, interpreting poetry, but savoring, tasting poetry, enjoying poetry. So that is the secret of the best poetry of my country and the best poetry everywhere. When I read ancient Latin American poetry and Japanese haiku poetry, I find the same kind of playfulness. It's serious but playful at the same time. So it's like a Zen sage laughing Buddha. He's playful, but he's also the Buddha. This is the ideal I'm trying to approximate in my personal life and also in my poetry and in my relationships. Because after all, the world is evanescent. Must have read my poems about the ancient Latin American cities like Caral, Chile. They lost it for centuries. They're now ruins. But what could have been the experience of the people who lived there? So evanescence, the Buddha said, is the source of frustration. But I would say evanescence is the raison d'etre for celebration. The world is beautiful because it is evanescent. That's why it needs to be not celebrated. Let scientists do it, let post-structuralists do it, but for us poets and playwrights to celebrate, to dance is the whirling dance of Sufis, the order of Sufis,
Mhm.
to which set the great Jalaluddin Rumi owed his allegiance. That the form of communion is the kind of whirling dance. It's playful. And in India, we have this great image of Shiva as a dancer Shiva, that Raja.
Mhm.
So we had a great theatre director called B.V. Karath, who was like my elder brother, used to say in theatre, unless you make people laugh, at least 5 minutes after the play begins, they'll start laughing at your seriousness.
Mm.
So I don't want to be that kind of poet or playwright. I want people to laugh, to savor, to enjoy, to celebrate.
And I'd like to finish my intervention by expressing the gratitude of people around the world for your kindness and your humbleness, Shiva. I've seen you bare feet. I've seen you playing. I've seen you speaking, on deep topics. Every single time I've seen you, you have been yourself and you have been humble. In that way, you have inspired a generation of writers across the world. A young poet from Medellin just told me how grateful she is for the big role you have played in her career. That's but one example, and there are many invisible miracles, but in a personal level, Shiva, I want to express my gratitude because you remind me, or you let me see, or you made me realize, dear poet, that I could be both. I could one day become a wise professor and a young poet at the same time. That I could keep my mind open to new sounds, new musics. That I could also confront the harsh realities of this moment in history while savoring life, existence. Sometimes next to you, seated in a rock in the desert. Sometimes next to my students in a university, and sometimes in a library. Every single time I have carried, since I met you, the permission that you, without saying a word, gave me to be myself all the time and to be a childlike poet that is open to learn more and more from you and every single human being, every single being in the planet. With my gratitude, Shivaprakash, I hope to see you soon, dear brother. It's great to see that people recognize your work all over the place. I bring you the greetings from all our friends that are traveling now, and I hope to see you soon.
I'd just like to add a footnote to this conversation between us. I'm extremely thankful to you for organizing my reading in the room where my favorite
Garcia
poet,
Lorca.
Ron Loca, had lived when he was in New York, when he wrote his The Poet in New York,
I
And,
know exactly. Yeah.
and that is I could see how troubled Loca was about the city, how
Mhm.
troubled he was about the years. He lived there for 6 or 7 years, he never learned a word of English. So I wanted to connect it with that ambience of Lorca's, of that phase of Lorca's life, which was possible because of you. It was, I would call it a coincidence. I would like to call it a kind of miracle. Thank you.
And I have to add another note, okay? I have the honor of bringing you to read poetry in 2 historical places. One of them is Walt Whitman's birthplace.
Yes.
In the house where Walt Whitman was born, you read your poems. And then in the same place where Garcia Lorca used to read his poetry while in New York, you read his poetry. And you should know that a couple of months ago, I was walking by the place in Manhattan, and someone was walking with me, a couple of colleagues, and I was telling them, because they are not, they don't know much about poetry. I told them, in that place, in that building, Garcia Lorca used to read his poetry. And then another friend who was there for your reading said, and Shivaprakash.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.
A wonderful journey into the world of Shivaprakash's poetry, into this book, and into this unlimited world of Shivaprakash as a poet of the world. Thank you so much for your insights into his poetry, your insights into Shivaprakash, the man. So one of the things that emerged from your responses, I feel, is that a poet can travel without becoming culturally anonymous. He can carry his particular history and literary memory with him, while also entering another reader's world. So lovely. Thank you so much. Let me now invite Shweta to respond. Shweta Garg is a poet, writer, and teacher at Johns Hopkins University. Her own work and scholarship engage with questions of literature, culture, gender, and representation. Shweta, I would like to invite you to respond to In the Light of Shiva from your own perspective as a poet and reader. You may also read some poems if you wish that you would particularly like us to hear, or you can also engage in a conversation with Shivaprakash.
Kamalakar, incidentally, Shweta was my student in JD.
Oh, lovely. Over to you, Shweta.
So you took my first line. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Bhat and Rati ji, for organizing this. And I would like to connect what Rati ji said and what Carlos said. You both come from very different vantage points, and yet you had similar sort of undertones about your readings of Sir, and I'll continue to call Shivaprakash Sir, and in this context he is the Sir. Okay, so Rati ji spoke about Vaishvikta, which is of course translation for universality, which Carlos spoke about, and how I was thinking that when you read Sir's work, how personal it is, how idiosyncratic and authentic, like, the rabbit, the rat, the cat and lion in his own distinct way, how personal. And yet, even if you don't live in the narrative world, what Professor Shivaprakash weaves around him, you still feel connected to it. So you can be a poet from Latin America, and I do know, even before today's conversation, Carlos, that Sir has a presence in Latin Americas, and then so many other cultures also. And this is perhaps the kind of poetry which translators would question, and translators perhaps would grapple with the gravitas of bringing a culture to another culture. And yet, I think with his perspective, with his uniqueness and his authenticity, it somehow manages to translate itself. Thank you so much, Professor Bhat, for sharing in the light of Shiva, not just with me, but the world, because the light of Shiva dazzled me as a reader. And here it's important for me to create my own vantage point because you all have different. So I am a Kannada speaker, but Kannada comes to me in an oral tradition. So I call myself unlettered in Kannada language. So I can understand Kannada, if somebody's reading out. And here, the only way I could access Sir's poetry is through English translation. And yet, when I think the first time I read Sir's work, I, of course, was a student, a master's in JNU. I did one of the courses, theater courses with Sir, and that changed the way I understand theater and drama, but also the way I understand word. And it happened through his own writing. And one of the plays, Sir, if you remember, was Sati. So every discourse about Sati since then is very close to my heart. I remember telling Sir, and it's possible you may have forgotten, I felt Sir spoke about rasa right now, and I felt that Sir's writing has it's all imbued with Veera Rasa, Raudra, there is Raudra in it. And at the same time, the playfulness that Carlos spoke about, so there is that. And at the same time, there is Shringara also, such delicate beauty. And somehow he seems to, in so many sort of, almost self-consciously, infuse that in his verses. I don't know how conscious or how aware he is, or it just comes naturally to him. So when I read this book, I read through it, and I read through it linearly, Carlos, not the opposite way, but I believe that's a brilliant idea too. So I was looking at different volumes from which this poetry, this volume was fed on. But then I was sort of asking myself that, are these really different volumes? Are these really different poems? Or is it just one long epic poem with multiple helix, countless entry points into Sir's poetic corpus? So in that sense, I think I'm again very grateful to Professor Bhat for bringing this volume to readers like me, and also readers who, as Saxena ji said, that who are new to Professor Shivaprakash's work. This will be a great entry point for them to get into Sir's work. As I said before, there is a rhythm in Sir's work. It has its own distinct energy, personal, yet it is transcendental. And here I have to talk about Sir's theater. And as somebody who's studied his theater, played parts in it, in Sir's theater, as well as in his poetry, there is no posing, there is no posturing, but there is being and there is becoming. So Sir doesn't assume a role, but he lives as a mystic minstrel, a dasaya, a vachanakara, a Homeric bard, if you will, and even the now abused word bhakta. He doesn't don a poetic persona in a conventional sense. He is him, So first-time reader of Shivaprakash may remark at the vividness of his narrative world, the wit, the music. Of course, it's impressive, but it's important to understand that he is not just telling a grand story, but he dwells in those. And he doesn't visit that realm, the realm of the past, like you and I would visit a museum looking at past works, past stories, and artifacts. He doesn't do that. He lives in the world, he breathes that world like a living language, like a living world. And I think that's where it's distinct. And that's probably why, even if you're a reader, who doesn't understand Kannada or from a very different cultural context, I think that's the reason, because he lives it, it becomes translatable across cultures and time. He bears witness to Buddha speaking to Angulimal, one of the poetry. He is drenched in the water of Indrani. He's there while Tuka's Abhangas refuse to drown. He shares the shame and fury of Caliban against his colonizer. Like we all have his fury, and Shivaprakash has that too. And he's distraught by the journey of Odysseus. He, by the way, becomes one with Shiva, the way Shiva becomes one with Sati and Parvati. The poetic self in his narrative poetry, it dissolves the self. So there is the self, and yet there is this striving to dissolve, to disappear. into something else, something larger. It transcends the self. And I think that's the beauty of Sir's work. But then there are other poems where the self emerges. So even though at some level you want to effuse, yourself, there are other poems where it's just you. And that persona, that person is full of vulnerabilities, full of self-awareness, like the first poem that Professor Bhat brought out, that, this awareness of being a particular poet, being aware that, okay, all these journeys do not reach the destination. So this is a person who has desires, small desires, big desires. And I think being aware of that makes him this mystic minstrel who is also so human, right? And that's the beauty of many of his poems. So I think another passing refrain in his writings, and especially in this book, is this man visiting cities of the world. Because I think later on in his own words, he talks to Professor Bhat that because he isn't Rembrandt, he isn't so wise, and he needs to figure out the world by viewing the world. So you see him in his journeys, his sojourns. He's counseling friends in his journey. He makes pit stops, make connection, changes life. He's also sharing his yearning for love. I'm talking about vulnerability. This is it, right? So this is a poet who's young at heart. He's yearning for love, fearing loss, going through heartbreaks. And Sir said something about, effervescence, that the fact that everything is so transient, it makes it perhaps more beautiful. So he's painfully aware the transience of love, the fact that there is a lover in the first part of the book, and he pleads that lover, do not get into the market, so that's the refrain in the poem. In the poem, I think, I will just be back. And then in other one, which is actually one of my favorite, to imagine encounters between Shivaprakash and Professor Jamakandi. Sir, we've had conversations like that at different phases of my life. You were Professor Jamakandi to me, and maybe many like me, asking us to stop with our futile quests for love, for fame, for I don't know, career. So you acted, you've been there, but perhaps I wasn't as yeah, I think I wasn't as humble as you were with that advice which was bestowed upon me. I resisted that advice. Maybe I still do, but I'm grateful for that nonetheless. So that's one of my favorite poetry. The other thing which I see Shivaprakash sir doing is not only like yearning after love, but also deep sense of mourning. Okay, and yearning and mourning are not very different here. His mourning becomes somehow Shiva's mourning for Sati, but also mourning for human condition, his compassion. I mean, and that mourning could happen because at some level there is such compassion. He uses the word father and mother in to describe one figure, and I feel the same sort of androgyny in his writing sometimes. Like he kind of touches the brow of a weary city like a mother would. He talks to a fellow like a father would. So there is this androgyny, this parenthood with him wherever he travels. Affection of a familiar friend, and how compassionately he accepts the falling facades of old cities. There are poems after poems where he talks about let the cities age, stop repairing the cities. I mean, something that Saxena ji said about Korean faces like plastic, with plastic intervention. And he's like, don't do that to cities, not just people. Don't do that to cities. Don't do that to our natural world. Let it age, let it gracefully become what they are, because transformations through time are probably real transformations and a rite of passage we need to, not just humans, but cities need to go through, the world needs to go through. So here is a person who is accepting of change, yearning for perhaps the past, but also having this capacity to revisit the past, to relive it, to witness it for those who are less fortunate, less, more limited by their limited imagination. So you do that for us. You take us sometimes with you. Sometimes you give us a glimpse of your journeys outside and journeys inside. So you give us all that through your different books. So I don't have much to say, but I have like long list of poems which I wish you would read, so rather than I would. And I have a couple of questions, so you tell me, how do we want to go? Can I ask you some questions, and can I make demands of you to read it out for us?
As you like.
Sure. So first, question is, from Milarepa to this person writing about aging cities, there have been decades, right? Is that person the same person? What has changed? What has evolved? What do you miss?
Well, I can only answer this question through a parable from a Buddhist scripture. Once one of Buddha's disciple asked him, Bhante means master in Pali, do humans have a soul, everlasting soul? Buddha pointed to a flame and said, look at this flame for some time. And then he said, after some time, look at it again. Is the same flame or different? Then he asked him, have you seen a river? He said, yes. The river is always flowing. The old water is flowing away and new water is coming in. Is it the same river or different? How did you look when you were a 5-year-old? And how did you look when you were a 10-year-old? How do you look now? Are you the same or different? The disciple had no answer. But Buddha answered the question for him. He said in Pali, Dacha Ando. Dacha, it's not the same, it's not different.
Hmm.
So it's this paradox of the coexistence, the synchronicity, the consanguinity between the changing and the unchanging. That has always engaged my imagination. And what gave me a fillip to delve deep into it was my profound interest in Buddhism, not only as a philosophy, but in the practice of Buddhist meditation and so on. So, the guy who wrote Milarepa is the same as the guy who wrote another poem now. He's also different. So, the binaries break down in poetry. It's the job of the poet to break down the binaries, to suggest the coexistence of many parallel worlds and parallel realities, parallel temporalities and parallel spatialities. That's how a poem written 2000 years ago becomes present to us now. And in the critical discourse where I live, people talk about the significance of contemporaneity of poetry. I don't believe in contemporaneity. I believe in the present. That's why Aeschylus is more present to me than some contemporary Kannada playwright or an English playwright. Because imagination is a travel, a journey, a voyage across different temporalities, different spatialities, and also between different avasthas, states of awareness, wakefulness, dream, dream within dream. I also have many poems about dreams within dreams, and sleep, life, and death, and reincarnation in this sense.
So your response to the question started off as a poetry, and then it almost became some sort of a prophecy. So thank you so much. This was more than I could have expected, and maybe I did. Nothing less is to be expected. I have another question, and this is something maybe more in line
Shwetaji,
with-
before you move, Shwetaji, if you don't mind,
Sure.
before you move on
Sure.
to the next question to Sir,
Yes.
it would be nice if you could read one poem and then we move to the next question.
Sure. You know what? I'm going to read two imagined encounters between Shivaprakash and Professor Jamakandi. Decades ago, when Shivaprakash, the poet, was still young and not yet a poet, was speeding off on his winged horse, Professor Jamakandi, the philosopher, always a philosopher, asked him, "Where are you going, young man?" Replied Shivaprakash, the poet, "In search of an ideal beloved." Whereupon Professor Jamakandi, the philosopher, laughed skeptically and said, "Don't waste your life. You will never find her." Decades later, when Shivaprakash, the poet, who was no more a poet, was trudging along on his lame horse, Professor Jamakandi, the philosopher, who was still a philosopher, asked, "Where are you going, old man?" Replied Shivaprakash, the poet, "In search of an ideal lover." Professor Jamakandi, the philosopher, laughed much more skeptically and said, "You've already wasted your life. You will never find her." Shivaprakash, old and no more a poet, continued his search till he thought he had found an ideal lover, who did not think she had found her ideal lover. The poet and his ideal, no more lovers, told each other similar stories and concluded, "There are no ideal lovers, but only idols and ideals."
Lovely. Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, this is. We talked about playfulness and witticism. I mean, this is all that, but then so much more. You know, it's profound and prophetic as so many levels. And I read it many years ago, this poem, and I'm rereading. I mean, I was selecting which poem I would like to read, and I thought of that, and it's been perhaps 10+ years since I read it before, and it. I was feeling. I was thinking of similar encounters with Sir at different stages of my life. So, a special poem for me. And again, special poem for people who are in different stages of searching about love and other things that you do. So, yes. So can I ask another question to Sir? And again, as I said, this is from a curious. I mean, I'm just curious about how it works. So, do you treat your English poetic offspring any different than your Kannada offsprings? And how, when poetry comes to you, how is it formed? What words do you hear? Do they reverberate in Kannada? Do they reverberate in English?
So for a long time, I was monogamously wedded to Kannada poetry. Then after some time, I found some poems composing themselves in my mind, in spite of myself, in English. Sometimes half English, half Kannada. And other languages would also creep in. I've also written a poem in Sanskrit, by the way. And then I discovered both my Kannada poetry and English poetry are the translations of another language, the language of my dreams. As Octavio said, not much difference between translation and the original. Even an original poem is the translation of what a poet wants to write but will never get to write. That's why I said a poet is a stubborn pilgrim who is always journeying but will never find a destination. He is the river which will never reach the ocean.
May I ask one question? Can you read one poem in Kannada? Because I heard you reading in Kannada, and it is very interesting for our audience also. Shivaprakash ji, one or two, because
Yes.
I have seen you.
I read better I read some short poems in Kannada. Just a moment, give me time. Let me make selection. Okay, let me read this. This is a lullaby which I read everywhere. When I went to a small town in El Salvador, I read it in a school. I had no translation. I Google translated it and asked a Chilean poet, composer who was with us to read it out. And there were about 500 children. The way they responded to it was so thrilling, after they finished reading this poem, there was a long queue of school kids waiting for the autograph. And I felt so great then. I'll first give you the gist of this poem in English. Perhaps I don't know whether Kamalakar can find the English translation to this poem, but I'll do a rough and ready translation. Very first, a short poem. Sleep, my daughter, sleep. Like the cloud on the lap of the sky. Sleep, my daughter, sleep. Sleep, my daughter, sleep. Like thunder in the heart of the cloud. Sleep, my daughter, sleep. Sleep, my daughter, sleep. Like volcano in the womb of the ocean. Sleep, my daughter, sleep. Sleep, my daughter, sleep. Like earrings in the depths of her soul. Sleep, my daughter, sleep. Now I'll read the Kannada of it. Malagawa, Yowa, Malagawa, Malagawa, Malagawa. Aga sada vadilidali, Mugilu Malagawa, Hagi, Malagawa, Yowa, Malagawa, Malagawa. Balagawa. Mugildina edeyaldi sirilu balaguwa hage balagawa. Yauwa balagawa balagawa balagawa. Kadala hebbisiralli kichu balaguwa hage balagawa. Yauwa balagawa balagawa balagawa. ಅಂತರಾಳಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಬಯಕೆ ಮಲಗುವ ಹಾಗೆ ಬಲಗವ್ವ ಯವ್ವ ಬಲಗವ್ವ ಬಲಗವ್ವ ತದಬಗೆ ಬಲಗವ್ವ ಚೂಚು 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 ಬಲಗವ್ವ ಯವ್ವ ಬಲಗವ್ವ ಬಲಗವ್ವ ತದಬಗಡೆ ಬಲಗವ್ವ. This is what I done another short poem, which is from one of my plays. This is the concluding prayer of the play, which is my adaptation of Kalidas's Malavika Mitra. It's called Malavika. It's called the actor's prayer. Letter of Prarthana. I'll give you a rough and ready translation of it. Please bless us that even after a lot of dancing, our ankles don't get exhausted. So that even after a lot of singing, our voices don't die down. Even after a lot of painting, our brushes will not wear out. Even after many separations, lovers reunite. So that we get liberation through attachment. So that our heart doesn't lose hope in victory or defeat. Please bless us so that we imitate you, you who are inside us like a flower in the bud, you who spread the world like a peacock feather and dance. You, the dancer king, the Raja of the Hall of Consciousness. You, the spouse of the goddess of consciousness, Chit-Shakti. ಕುಡಿದು ಹೆಜ್ಜೆಗಳು ದಡಿದು ಹೋಗದ ಹಾಗೆ ತುಲಿದು ಗೀತ ನಡಗಿ ಹೋಗದ ಹಾಗೆ ರಚಿಸಿ ಕುಂಚಗಳು ತವೆದು ಹೋಗದ ಹಾಗೆ ಬಿರಿದು ಪ್ರಣಯಗಳು ಮರಳಿ ಕೂಡುವ ಹಾಗೆ ಭುಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನೇ ಭುಕ್ತಿಸಿ ಗಳಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳುವ ಹಾಗೆ ಗೆಲುವು ಸೋಲಲಿ ಜೀವ ಅಯತಪ್ಪದ ಹಾಗೆ ಅನುಗ್ರಹಿಸು ನಾವು ನಿನ್ನನುಕರಿಸುವಂತೆ ನೆನೆಯೊಳಗೆ ಹೂವಂತೆ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಡಗಿರುವುದೇ ಗರಿಗೆದರಿ ನವಿಲಂತೆ ಲೋಕವಾಡುವುದೇ ಚಿತ್ಸಭಾದತ್ತಕದ ನಟರಾಜನೇ ಚಿತ್ ಶ್ರೀದೇವಿ ಜೊತೆಗಾರದೆ ಚಿತ್ಸಭಾದತ್ತಕದ ನಟರಾಜನೇ ಚಿತ್ ಶ್ರೀದೇವಿ ಜೊತೆಗಾರದೆ. I think this will do.
So the first poem that you read, the lullaby, that was also a version of that was used in our Karnabhara, Manipuri Karnabhara production, if you remember. So that was the ending, the ending of the play.
Yes. That poem has traveled all over the world. And whenever I read it, people of all ages resonate with it. And once I was reading this in that famous bookshop in Iowa City, when I was in the Iowa International Writers Program in the 2000, when I was singing this, I was tapping the floor with my feet. And one of the girls were listening to, the listeners asked me, why were you doing that? Suddenly it occurred to me, I hadn't thought about it. I said, what do you mean by meter in poetry? She said, feet. So that's where poetry begins. You tap the earth with your feet. That's the fundamental unit of measurement in poetry.
Read some more poems, no, sir?
In English or Kannada?
In English will do, yes.
Can I suggest a very long poem? Is that okay, Professor Bhat?
Yeah, sure.
So, sir, to the Daughter of Mountains, if you feel like it, from the collection.
You have the English with you. So isn't it better I read the Kannada one?
I will prefer Kannada. I will prefer
Yeah,
Kannada.
you keep
Yes.
looking at the English text. And I'll read the Kannada. Because this is a poem which has which many young lovers used to instead of love letters to each other. See, I've written so much, that I sometimes find it difficult to locate this. Okay, got it. 546. A. 546, sorry. Okay, got it. This is my collected book of poems, about 800 pages. I've written 200 more pages after this. It's called Be Reborn. Matteri Huttuvadu. It's also called To the Daughter of Mountains. Bettagala Magal. That is Parvati. Shiva speaking to Parvati. You see, as you know, the story goes, PG, that Sati sacrificed herself in the Daksha's yajna, where her husband was insulted. And then she was reborn as first, when she did that, she was Dakshayani, she was reborn as Parvati and did a lot of austerities to be reunited with Shiva. And the poem is a recreation of that mythical journey. ಹೋಗು ದಕ್ಷದ ಮಗಳೇ, ಹೋಗು ದಕ್ಷದ ಮಗಳೇ, ನೀನು ತಿರುಗಿ ಬರುವೆ ಅಂತ ಕರಗದೆ ಕಾಯುತ್ತವೆ ಈ ನೀರು ಮಂಜಿನ ಗುಡ್ಡ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊರೆವ ಗವಿ ಕತ್ತಲಲ್ಲಿ ಅರಳುತ್ತಲೇ ಇರುತ್ತವೆ ನೀಲಿ ಮಂಜು ಕಾವಲಿ. ಕೈಯ ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಮಾರಿ ಜೀವ ಗಡ್ಡ ಬತ್ತಿ ದೀಪಗಳ ಉದಿಸುತ್ತ ಕಡ್ಡಲ್ಲಿ ಸುತ್ತ ತಿದ್ದ ಬರುವಿದ ಹಗಲು ಇರುವಿದ ಗೆಜ್ಜೆಯುಲಿಗೆ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆಗಳ ದಿಕ್ಕುತ್ತ ಹೊಟ್ಟೆಯದಗಳ ಟೊಳ್ಳು ಮಾಡಿಸುತ್ತ ಪಾತಾಳಗಳ ದೆತ್ತಿ ಗೌರಿ ಶಂಕರ ದೆತ್ತಿ ನಡುಗುವಾಗಿ ಆಗಸದ ವಿಶಾಲ ಬೆತ್ತಿ ಹರಿಯುವ ಹಾಗೆ ನೆಗೆದು ಕುಪ್ಪಳಿಸಿ ನೆಗೆದು ಕಡಿದುರುಳಿ ಮತ್ತೆತ್ತು ಕುಳಿಯುತ್ತದೆ ಇರುತ್ತಾರೆ ಈ ರದ್ದಿ ಆ ಭೃದ್ದಿ ಭೂತಗಣಗಳ ಮಧ್ಯೆ. ದೇವಪುತ್ರಿಗೂ ಆಜೀವ ತಿರುಕನಿಗೂ ಯಾವ ಯಾತರದಂತೂ ಹೊತ್ತಾಯಿತು ಹೊರಡು ಕಟ್ಟಿಕೋ ನೆನಪಿನ ಗಂಟು ಮುತ್ತುಗಳ ದತ್ತು ಬೆದ್ದೋಲೆ ಅಪ್ಪಿಗೆ ಸೋಕುಗಳ ಜನತಾರು ಸೀರೆ ಕಟ್ಟಿಕೋ ನೆನಪಿನ ಗಂಟು ಒಳವ ಸುಡುಗಾಲಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲುಬು ಚೂರು ತದುಕು ಬಾಡಿ ಬಿಸುಟ ವಿಮಾನಗಳ ನಡುವಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನಿಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬಂಟಿ ಪಕ್ಕ ಈ ಮುದಿಯತ್ತು ನೀ ಬರುವೆ ಎಂಬ ಕನಸಿನ ಇರುವೆ ಕಚ್ಚಿದರು ಮರೆತು ಹೊರಗಿರುವ ಭೂತಗಣಗಳ ನಡುವೆ ಶಕ್ತಿ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಶಿವನ ಮೈಯೆಲ್ಲ ಶವವಾಗಿ ಬತ್ತುವಳು ಗಂಗೆ ತಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕದ್ದುವರು ಚಂದ್ರಮುರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನ ಎದೆವರೆಗೆ ಹಗಲು ಗನಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಬಿದ್ದ ಹೆರಳುಗಳ ಕಪ್ಪು ಹೊಳಪಲ್ಲಿ ಹುಕುಮಾರಿದ ಸೂರ್ಯ ಕಿರಣಗಳ ಬಿಲ್ಲು ಒಡೆದು ಕಾಮದ ಬಿಲ್ಲು ಎಷ್ಟು ಕಾಮದ ಬಿಲ್ಲು ಲೋಕಗಳು ಭೂತಗಳ ಬೂದಿ ಬುಡುಕದ ಬುಡುಬುಡುಕೆಯವದ ಸುಡುಗಾಡು ಮೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗು ದಕ್ಷಿಣದಗಡೆ ದಶದಿಕ್ಕುಗಳ ಜ್ವಾಲೆ ಕರೆಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ನಿಂತ ಭೂಲೋಕಗಳ ಯಜ್ಞ ಶಾಲೆ ಕರೆಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ನಿಂತ ಮರೆತ ವಿನಯದ ಧೂಮ ಬಾಳೆ ಕರೆಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ನಿಂತ ಬಾಳು ಸತಿ ಬಾಯಿದ್ದು ಪತಿ ಇದ್ದರು ನಿನಗೆ ಸತಿಯದ್ದು ಶಾಮ ಡಾಮರ ಡಮರು ತೊಗಲು ಹರಿಯುವ ಹಾಗೆ ಕೂರ ಕರ್ಕಶ ಬೆಳೆತು ಹಾಡು ಅನ್ನುವ ಹಾಗೆ ಅಸುರರೇ ಸುರಾಗಿ ಸುರರೇ ಅಸುರರ ಹಾಗೆ ಕೇಳಿದೆ ನಡುವೆ ಮಂತ್ರಘೋಷ ನಡುವೆ ನರಕಿರರ ಮಾಂಸಭಕ್ಷ ನಡುವೆ ಈ ಹೋಗಿ ಶಿವದಲ್ಲಿ ಭವದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಬಿದ್ದಾಗ ಉರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದ ಜೊತೆ ಬೂದಿ ಸುರಭೂದು ದೇವುಗಳು ಚಿಂತಾಮಣಿಗಳು ಕೇಳಿಯ ನಡುವೆ ಮಂತ್ರಘೋಷ ನಡುವೆ ವರವರ ಗುಟ್ಟಿ ನರಕದೊಳಗೆ ನಾನು ನರಕಗಳೊಳಗೆ ಒಳಲ ಸುಡುಗಾರೊಳಗೆ ಎಲುಬು ತುಣುಕುಗಳೊಳಗೆ ಜೀವ ಸಂಚಾರಗಳು ಹುಳುಗಳು ಪಡಿಯಾಗಿ ಎಡೆಯತ್ತಿ ಒಲೆದು ನೋವು ಹುಗ್ಗಿಗೆ ಅಚರವು ಚೆರವಾಗಿ ಸಿಡಿಲು ಡಮರುಗ ಅಗೋ ನರರೂಪಿ ಬಿಚ್ಚು ಬಳ್ಳಿ ಸಂಚೆ ಇವೋ ಕಳೆಲ್ಲ ಬಡಮಾನುಲ ತವರಿದ್ದು ಇದ್ದು ರಕ್ತದ ವರ್ಷಾಕಾಲ ಮಲೆಯ ಮಾರುತ ಇದ್ದು ಪ್ರಯ ಜಂಜಾವಾತ ಇದ್ದು ತಂಡವ ನೃತ್ಯ ಅಗೋಬದ್ದ ಇಗೋದಿದ್ದ ಭೂತಗಣಗಳ ಮಾತ ವೀರಭದ್ರ ಆಹಾ ಕರುಣಾ ಸಮುದ್ರ ದೇವಿಯರ ಅಳಲು ಮುಟ್ಟಿದ್ದರು ನಭವಂತು ಕಿವುಡಾಗಿ ಕುರುಡಾಗಿ ಕಡಿಯುವುದು ದೇವದೇವರ ಗುಡ್ಡ ಕೆಡಹುವುದು ಸ್ವರ್ಗವೈಭವ ಸ್ತಂಭ ಕೇಳಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಮಂತ್ರಘೋಷಣೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅವಧಿ ಕಂತದೆ ಬೇಕೆದ್ದು ಎದ್ದು ಭವದಿ ನೆದ್ದು ಮತ್ತೆ ನೀ ಹುಟ್ಟುವುದು ಬೆಟ್ಟಗಳ ಬದಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬಯಲ ಬಟ್ಟಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಡುಗಳ ಒಡನಾಡಿ ಬಾದಾಡಿ ಕೋಗಿಲೆ ಗಿರಿಯ ಜೊತೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸಿಂಹಶಾಬ್ದೂಲಗಳ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಆಟಗಳಾಡಿ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೇಡದ ರಸಸಿದ್ಧ ಯೋಗಿಗಳ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಅಲೆದಾಡಿ ಹೊಸ ಜಗದ ಕಡೆ ನದೀ ತೀರಗಳ ಪಕ್ಕ ಹಸಿರಾದ ನಗರಗಳ ಹಸಿರದ ಹಳ್ಳಿಗಳ ಗಲ್ಲಿ ಬೀದಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅರಸುತ್ತ ಬರುವೆ ಕೊಟಿದೇಹಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊರಳುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಎಡದಿಗ್ಗಳೇ ಬಿಸಿಲೆ ಕೋಗಿಲೆಯ ಬಾಬರವೇ ಹೇಳಿಯಲ್ಲಿದೆ ಹಾದಿ ನಾ ತೊರೆದು ಬಂದ ಭವಹರದ ಭವನಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾದಿರುವೆ ನಾನು ಇದಗಾಗಿ ಬರುವ ಭೂಮಿ ಹಿಮರಾಶಿ ಸುಡುಗಾಡುಗಳ ನಡುವೆ ಯುಗಮುದ್ರೆಯ ತೆರೆದು ದೇವಮಾನವನಾದ ಆ ಯುಗದ ಮೊದಲು ಇದು ನನ್ನ ಇಹಗಳ ಒಡತಿ ನಾನು ನಿನ್ನ ಮಹಗಳ ಒಡೆಯ ಬೆಸೆದು ಅರೆಚಣ ಬಿಡಿಸಿ ಮರುಚಣ ಬಿಡಿಸುವ ಅಪ್ಪಿಗೆ ಸಿಹಿ ಮುತ್ತೆ ಹಿಕ್ಷಣವೆದ ಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ತಿದಿಕೋ ಗುರುಳು ಹೋಗಿ ಬಾ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಮಗಳೇ.
Lovely, amazing, completely different experience of that poem as you read it. I'm sure, Shweta, you must have enjoyed listening to this.
What a untamed, unadulterated version. I mean, if I can call it a version, it's a very different experience.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know. I had marked a number of questions to you, sir, but I think instead of asking you question, I'll simply ask you to, speak to us about how you think your evolution as a poet, as somebody who not only writes poetry, but somebody who lives poetry, who imagines poetry, who has certain thoughts about poetry. Give us a kind of a glimpse into your thinking about poetry and living with poetry. Just want to kind of listen to you.
See, when I write poetry, I don't write it. It just forces itself out of me. I have no agenda. I have no formula. And I don't write unless it comes out like a baby from the womb, the fetus from the womb. And then I listen to his first scream, which is the seed of the poem. Then I follow that, like Radha following Krishna's flute song, like a yogi following the rhythm of his breath. I follow it through words which come spontaneously. And I discover the echoes of the poems I have not read, remember having read in this life. Maybe poems I've read in some past life. Maybe poems I read in some future life. Because like in Hawaiian philosophy, I believe, ancient Hawaiian philosophy, I believe there are so many words of, even in our Indian mythology, we talk about 14 worlds. We simultaneously exist on many planes. And the digital revolution has made this palpable to us. Somebody is Washington, somebody in New York, somebody is in Ahmednagar, somebody in Delhi, somebody in Bangalore. Are we in the same place or different? Are we in the same time or different? You said good morning to Carlos and Shweta, but we say good evening to each other. That's why I said poetry is a journey to different temporalities, different spatialities, and different what we call avasthatrayas in Agamic philosophy, states of consciousness. And all my favorite poets don't live only in the conscious plane. In English, my most favorite poet is William Blake, who talked about three realms of being: experience, and innocence, experience, and imagination. And he said, the city of Jerusalem can be built only in the world of imagination. And he called it Jesus the Imagine. He identified imagination with Jesus. Of late, I've been studying a lot of these modern healers, 20th century healers. They Godard, who equate imagination with God. And in my favorite school of philosophy in India, Kashmir Shaivism, Shiva is a synonym of Pratibha, which is the equivalent of imagination. It's called imagination. That's why I don't think that poetry comes from memory. Coleridge said only inferior kind of poetry comes from memory. He called it the poetry of fancy, but he said the poetry of imagination does not come from memory. It is the repetition in the finite mind of the eternal I am. I am is the name of God in the Old Testament. What Moses asked when Jehovah revealed himself to him in the burning bush, he asked him, "What's your name?" He said, "I am that I am," which is a very sacred phrase. Of course, we have its equivalence in Indian spirituality also. So that's it. I don't like them. They are a medium. And sometimes, of late, I have not been able to make poems because when I wake up with my eyes are closed, I start seeing images, words, and there's somebody nearby. I can call them. Like a medium, I can go on dictating. This I used to do with my earlier spouses. And then, when I became disespoused, the students who used to live with me. For example, when Madhu Devan was sometimes staying with me, I would wake up in the night and just start reciting the poem, would write it down. And there were several students like that who were co-creators of my poems. So my process is very different. And for a long time, I never made this public because I entered the world of poetry in the age of what I call Kannada pseudo-modernism, which was not modernist enough. I attacked Kannada modernism in those days because it was modern. Now I attack it for not being modernist enough. It was modernist in the sense of Anglo-American modernism, not in the East European or Latin American sense of modernism. So, the exploration. You remember that poem from by Constantine Cavafy called Ithaca. He says, when you go to Ithaca, this happens, that happens. When they reach Ithaca, Ithaca has nothing to give you. But at least she gave you this wonderful journey. Be grateful to Ithaca for that. So every act of writing a poem, I think, is a dramatization of this great poem by one of my favorite Greek poets from Alexandria, Constantine Cavafy.
Okay. Absolutely. We have actually several other questions also to ask, but maybe before, although it's already time, I think all of you will allow for a little more time. So before we move on, I would like to request Ratiji to read a translation, at least one translation. Let us try to get in, please. You have translated more than one, I believe, Ratiji. Your mic is off.
I am very what does he say that forgetful. तो मैं छोटी छोटी सी कविताएं हैं. फर्स्ट पहली जो कविता है, द फर्स्ट पोएम आई थिंक इन दिस अबाउट द पोएट दैट what he has written, the first poem. So that also the poets per preface, that also I have translated. I will start from it. कवि जिद्दी लेकिन भाग्यहीन तीर्थ यात्री है, जिसकी महत्वाकांक्षाओं से भरी यात्राएं हमेशा हार जाती हैं. चाहे कोई भी लक्ष्य हो, कुछ भी हो, वह पहुंच नहीं पाता. उसके भाग्य में तो कहीं और भटकना है. यद्यपि वे स्तुति करते हैं देवों, ऋषियों और देवदूतों की, लेकिन उनके लिए तो नरक का द्वार ही खुल पाता है. यीट्स ने अपना प्यार मॉडगोनो को पाना चाहा था, लेकिन उसके भाग्य में तो केवल ठंडी मूर्तियां ही थी. कविता वह नदी है जो कभी सागर तक नहीं पहुंच पाती. चाहे झरना हो या नदी, सदैव निर्मृति के अधीन है. कवि समस्त क्रांतियों का सहोदर है, जिसकी जलती महत्वाकांक्षाएं चुरा ली जाती हैं. प्रेमी जो सदैव साथ रहने की कस्में खाते हैं, वह रहस्यात्मक तरीके से बिछुड़ जाते हैं. कवि भाग्य को चुनौती देता है, मैं तुम्हें पालूंगा. असफलता का सच्चा साधक है, वह हमेशा ही नकारा गया है. शिवप्रकाश के दिल का दिल में भाग्य का ही इंतजार है. अब वह स्वयं एक मूर्ति है, उसी से संतृप्त है. I would like to read another poem, which is, I think she has also mentioned, Shweta has also mentioned about the river. He has written many poems about the river and it's beautiful. खैर नदी देश है, मैं सपने में इसमें प्रवेश करता हूँ. यहाँ असंख्य नदियां हैं, हर किसी के अपने गीत, खुशबू और स्वाद हैं, जो पूरे जमीन पर पसरे रहते हैं. अनेक बार एक दूसरे को काटती हुई, आपस में स्वाद, खुशबू और गीत बांटती हुई, वे साथ बहना जारी रखती हैं. उनमें मुड़ाव है नृत्यांगना के मार्ग के सरीखे, सदैव ही वह जल नृत्य. लेकिन मैं अचंभित हूँ, वे कब सागर तक पहुंचेंगी, अपने लक्ष्य तक. वे जल गीत में जवाब देती हैं, हम मीठे जल में बहती हैं, सागर के लिए पूर्ण उपयुक्त हैं, और नमकीन समंदर हमारा लक्ष्य ही नहीं. Third poem is Odysseus. I think Shweta has talked about it. This also, it is very interesting because the Odysseus film is now very popular. But he has written long back about the Odysseus. Such a beautiful poem. Odysseus कहता है, मेरे किसी ज्योतिष अथवा पंडित को भी मालूम नहीं था कि मैं अपने देश कब लौटूंगा. विजित किंतु नष्ट प्राय, पहचान में भी नहीं आ पाने वाला. असंख्य रुकावटों और उम्र के कारण कोई मुझे पहचान ही नहीं पाएगा. मेरी पत्नी तो इंतजार करके थक गई होगी. मेरा बेटा तेलोमेखस मुझे पहचान ही नहीं पाएगा, ना ही मेरी प्रजा पहचान पाएगी. हालांकि मैं कोशिश करूंगा कि उनको समझाऊं कि मैं ही महान ओडिसिस हूं, जिसने अनदेखे ट्रॉय को ध्वस्त किया. उनमें से शायद कोई विश्वास भी नहीं कर पाएगा, सिवाय उस धाय के जिसने मुझे बचपन में दूध पिलाया था. अपनी जीर्णता के बावजूद भी मैं ये जानता हूँ, यह सब कैसे होगा. बस मेरा प्रिय देश इथाका रहे. जब मैं वापस लौटूं, हो सकता है शायद वह भी ना रहे, मैं वापस आऊंगा. So these three poems I have translated. I want to translate more if time permit and my health permit. I will translate more of your poems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rati.
Thank you. Thank you, Rati ji. We have come to the end of this day's conversation. I believe we are already 15 minutes beyond our planned limit. What we have heard this evening is perhaps fitting for a book whose poems have traveled from Kannada to English, from English to Hindi, from poet's voice into the voices of translators and several readers across continents, and now into the conversations we have had this evening. I think that is one of the most valuable things a book of poetry can do, not simply preserve poems, but allow them to begin new journeys. So today, I think I have heard Shivaprakash. I don't call Shivaprakash. I always address him as Gurugale, which means Guruji. So it's a bit odd to call him by his name. I would like to thank you, sir, Guruji, for reading your poems. You know, every time I listen to him, I have he has been kind enough to host me a couple of times in his house, and I've had many conversations with him. And every time you listen to him, you are listening to a new Shivaprakash. You are listening to something completely new. I mean, about even poetry, he doesn't say the same things twice, like the images that like the metaphors he was using earlier. So it was truly a pleasure to listen to you. Very, very enriching and exhilarating it was listening to you this evening. Thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you, Rati ji, for sharing your responses and for your translations of Shivaprakash ji's poetry. Carlos Aguasaco and Shweta Garg for your responses and your very, very insightful, interventions, which has given me certainly new thoughts about reading Shivaprakash. Thank you so very much for your time and for your, kind participation in this evening's conversations. I must also thank Red River and Divya Jyoti Sharma for publishing In the Light of Shiva, and to Raza Foundation for supporting the publication. And a special thank you to Rati Saxena ji and Kritya-Poetry for creating this space, creating this evening, and bringing all of us together. Most of all, thank you to everyone who joined us and listened to the poems and the conversation and this discussion. I hope you will continue the journey by returning to the book. Before I say good night, please allow me to read. I haven't read a poem this evening, so let me read the closing poem, which is, I will read it in Kannada. It's a ghazal. It's one of the most well-written ghazals in Kannada. That's my personal, assessment, understanding of this. So allow me to read this ghazal. He has written several ghazals. I'll read one of my favorites. It is titled Bandeya Vasanta. It's a poem addressed to the Vasanta. ಕೊನೆಯ ಗೆಳೆಯರು ಮಾತೆ ಆಡದೆ ಹೊರಟು ಹೋದರು ಈ ದಿನ, ಕೊನೆಯ ಕವಿತೆಯ ಶಬ್ದ ಸಂಪದ ಲೂಟಿಯಾಯಿತು ಈ ದಿನ. ಪಾಪ ಕೋಗಿಲೆ ಕ್ರೂರ ಚೈತ್ರದ ಕೆಂದರಳಿನನ್ನು ಕಚ್ಚುತ್ತಾ, ಕೊನೆಯ ಹಾಡಲಿ ಮನವ ಕರಗಿಸಿ ಘೂಕನೆಂದಿತು ಈ ದಿನ. ನನ್ನ ತಲೆನೇ ವರಿಸುವಂತೆ ತೇಲಿ ಬಂದ ಮೇಘವು, ಮಳೆಯ ಕರೆಯದೆ ಗಾಳಿ ಹೊಡೆತಕ್ಕೆ ತೂರಿ ಹೋಯಿತು ಈ ದಿನ. ಎದೆಯ ಪೆಟ್ಟಿಗೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬಚ್ಚಿದ ಹಳೆಯ ನಂಬಿಕೆ ನಾಣ್ಯವ, ಕಳವು ಮಾಡಿದ ಚೂರಿ ತೋರಿಸಿ ಚೋರನೊಬ್ಬನು ಈ ದಿನ. ವರ್ಷಗಟ್ಟಲೆ ಪೂಜೆ ಮಾಡಿದ ಕನ್ಯೆ ದೇವತೆ ಅಂಗಕ್ಕೆ, ಮಂಗನೊಬ್ಬನು ಕೈಯ ಹಾಕಿ ಕೊಳಕು ಮಾಡಿದ ಈ ದಿನ. ಕೊನೆಯ ಕದನದ ಬಳಿಕ ಶಾಂತಿಯ ಭೂವಿಯಲುಳಿದ ಇಬ್ಬರೇ ಒಬ್ಬರೊಬ್ಬರ ಇರಿದು ಕೊಂದು ಒಡಿದು ಬಿದ್ದರು ಈ ದಿನ. ಎಲ್ಲ ನೋವನ್ನು ತಿಂಬ ಲೋಕಕ್ಕೆ ಕವಿಯ ಜೀವದ ಗೆಳೆಯನು, ಮಾತನಾಡದೆ ಹೊರಟು ಹೋದ ಹೇಳ ಕೇಳದೆ. ನಂಜು ಬೆರೆಸಿದ ಕಲ್ಲು ಮಣ್ಣಿನ ಪಂಜೆ ವನಗಳ ಬೀದಿಸಲಿ, ಬಂದೆಯ ವಸಂತ ಎಂದು ಯಾರು ಕಾವರು ಈ ದಿನ. ಕೊನೆಯ ಗೆಳೆಯರು ಮಾತನಾಡದೆ ಹೊರಟು ಹೋದರು ಈ ದಿನ, ಕೊನೆಯ ಕವಿತೆಯ ಶಬ್ದ ಸಂಪದ ಲೂಟಿಯಾಯಿತು ಈ ದಿನ. Thank you so very much, everyone, and good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was
Bye-bye.
fantastic, actually. Fantastic evening. Thanks to Carlos and Shweta and Shivaprakash ji. Actually, I wanted to ask you, when I saw your young age photo, I have not seen you in young age. So when I saw your young age photo, I was supposed to ask you that, did you think the same way when you were young also? So, but anyway, this was a joke.
Yeah, when I was,
But-
I was
because we grow with the age. Did you grow? Did you? You were so mature at that young age or not? That I wanted to know, because I was not. I was not at that age. Anyway, thanks a lot, शिवप्रकाश जी. आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. और
because
अच्छा
my
है.
mother, when I was young, my mother used to tell me,
जी क्या?
my mother
हाँ
repeatedly told me
हाँ
that she wanted to become a great poet.
हाँ.
She said, at least you become a great poet someday.
Oh,
Okay.
So I owe
That is
all my poetry to my mother.
thank you.
That's
It
why
was
there's
nice.
more of mother in my poetry than the father. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
all of you.
everyone. Good night and
Bye-bye.
have a
Bye-bye.
good day. Bye bye.
Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.